Growth Pains.
Hi everyone, welcome to this new episode of Growth Pains, where we talk about how we all screw up when growing our businesses. I'm your host, Ignacio Gallegos, also known as Nacho. Today, we'll be talking about topics such as trying to avoid burnout when there's always more to do, dealing with information overload, prioritizing quality over quantity, especially in the early days, and early stage funding. My guest today is Sançar Sahin. If I pronounce that correctly, give me a clap, Sançar. Former VP of Marketing at Typeform and Hotjar. Earlier this year, Sançar became the co-founder of Oliva, an online platform offering meaningful therapy for busy people, which is much needed for this bizarre year we've been experiencing. So thank you for joining me, man. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Nacho. Yeah, very good, thanks.
All right, dude, let's get it started. We usually start with a true or false, where I try to make people uncomfortable, but I don't think I never nailed it, but let me see if we can get to that today. So Let's start with the first one, just like true or false, and then we briefly talk to it and keep moving. So marketing is one of the professions that is most prone to burnouts. True or false?
I wouldn't know. Let's go for true, just because it's my experience.
You think it's true in a way? I think so, but it's very self-centered of me, right? But
look, I think we have, as humans, we have this habit to think that everything revolves around us and what we know. So I think it's very likely this is going on in all sorts of professions, from teaching to plumbing to marketing to everything. But marketing is what I know, and I've seen a lot of it. Let's put it that way.
I think what I find a bit particularly stressful sometimes is that there is a portion of your work that's not really, or of your output really, or of your results that is not entirely up to you, right? Like you could actually put in like high quality work, do everything that, and if the external factors and everything around it is not there, then it still doesn't pay off, right? So that's a bit stressful, but true.
Great point.
It's for a lot of jobs, I guess it's similar.
No, that's a good point. And just to quickly add to that, I think also marketing is just changing all of the time. So I think that adds to the stress that you always have this knowledge debt. You know, if you're not constantly reading books and reading articles and listening to podcasts, you're getting behind. So yeah, I think that can add to the stress.
Yeah. All right, second one. And this one is a bit controversial. Working in tech, either you are somebody or you are nobody. True or false?
I'll go the idealistic route. False.
Well, I think it is false, right? I as well, but you feel like that sometimes, don't you?
This is it, right? There's reality and there's perception. Some would say that perception equals reality.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, it's not true, right? There are many people contributing on many different levels, in significant ways, who aren't these well-known personalities, right? So without a doubt, it's definitely not true. But I think we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to be a name. I mean, this idea of personal branding has just exploded over the last 5 years or 5 to 10 years. So I think there's a lot of pressure on people.
Yeah, true that. All right, man. The next one, and this one is crowdsourced by a good friend of ours, Alex Yost. So kudos to him and a shout out. So this one, content marketing is a top of the funnel activity. True or false?
False.
How do you see it?
I mean, it is a top of the funnel activity, but it's also a middle of the funnel activity, a bottom of the funnel activity, and actually even a above the funnel activity, as I like to say sometimes.
What do you mean by that? What do you mean by above the funnel?
So look, I mean, top of the funnel awareness, trying to get people to understand if there's a problem, something you can solve, etc. But I think there's also a lot of, you can call it different things, right? Thought leadership, industry commentary, whatever it might be. I think even when people are quite far away from your funnel, there's still opportunities to start planting seeds, to get involved in the conversation. Don't worry, I'm not trying to coin a new term or anything, but
it would be a good place to do it, though. That would be okay. And okay, let's do the final question before we dive in your pains. And this is not a true or false, but this is a question. So, one thing that you are really, really bad at that has come to you in the last year or so that you can think of.
So, how much time do we have? No, I think so. One thing, look, in the kind of work environment, right? Something I've never been very good at is numbers off the top of my head. So if you put me on the spot and you talk, and it's quite funny, right? As a marketing leader.
Oh, I'm awful at it as well. And I studied engineering. Yeah.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so I don't want to go over any of your bridges. But yeah, I mean, I need time to digest numbers. I need to think about them. I need the help of a spreadsheet, a calculator.
Yeah.
I'm not good off the top of my head.
You're that guy that when people are just throwing percentages in meetings, you're like actually like putting it in your calculator and see like, is it 10% really that it's like?
It just doesn't make sense to me immediately. It's quite funny because one of my sisters is an absolute maths genius. So she's like the opposite to me. I've got the short end of the straw there.
Well, we all win some and we lose some, right? But I think it's funny because I can understand math fairly well, but I need to sit down and process it as well. It doesn't come to me like from the top of my brain. I don't have that.
Exactly.
Maybe it's just laziness, but it's not the way I think. So the first pain we want to talk about today is avoiding burnout, specifically when there is this feeling that there's always more to do, right? So before diving into burnouts, which are a topic on their own and probably more of a pandemic than the actual pandemic, let's discuss the feeling first, right? Like the feeling that there is always more to do, right? This feeling is a constant sort of stress in most of our minds. And it's particularly stressful when you're starting a new company, like what you're doing now with Oliva. So how has this been for you dealing with this one?
So how does it feel right now? Or
yeah, in this stage that you've been in Oliva for about 8 months already, right? How has that been for you while at time?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously starting your own company is exhausting. It's busy. You feel like you've never got a spare moment because for any spare moment you have, you're thinking about something else, right? You're thinking about the next thing, or I haven't done this thing, or whatever it might be. But quite honestly, I'm the furthest away I felt from burnout for a long time, being in this stage, because I feel like I'm in control of my boundaries, which I think is a really, really important part of being in control of burnout. So I think a lot of people think that, avoiding burnout is working less or taking more days off or whatever it might be. But actually, I think it's less about the hours you work and how much you do, and more about the boundaries you set and how confident you are that you're sticking to those boundaries. Because that gives you a sense of control. Yeah. Which burnout is really the sense of a lack of control. So that's one thing. I feel like I'm better now than I've ever been at creating and sticking to those boundaries. Definitely not perfect, but it's been a learning exercise. And also, I'm in a place where I chose to be. So I made the decision, a very conscious decision, to give up a well-paid job to be in this situation where I'm taking a lot more risks. And again, that gives me the sense of control, right? So although there's more risks and it's actually more dangerous, it feels much better because I'm taking control. So I think that sense of control is really important for avoiding the feeling of burnout. So right now, I feel good. I'm not saying that's not going to change because we've got a lot of stages ahead of us, right? There's funding, there's growth, there's mistakes. Who knows? Lawsuits, who knows what's coming ahead of us? I hope no lawsuits, but, there's a lot of stuff to come. So it's not to say that it's going to be like this forever, but right now I feel in a good place.
But in general, right? Because one thing is burning out, right? And the other thing is like knowing when to stop during your day, right? Because in a way, you could always do more, right? If you actually stayed 3 more hours, you could push out something else. If you actually stayed 4 more hours, you could. Are you good at setting those boundaries of saying, this is where I got today, and I know there's 20 things else I would have done, but I'm going to bed now?
Yeah. So I wouldn't say good. I wouldn't say I'm good at it. I'm definitely better at it. So I used to be very bad at this. So I used to very much, I would do probably 10 hours in the office, and then I'll take my laptop home and do another maybe 3 hours with my laptop, maybe in front of the TV, and just constantly just trying to do more, and that was not healthy. That was definitely not healthy. Now I'm much better at making sure at least I've done the things I need to do. So I'll go home. I generally won't get straight on the laptop. I'll do whatever I need to do. I'll go for a walk. I'll have a coffee, whatever it might be, make my dinner, watch a bit of telly, do all of that kind of stuff. But then I'll carve out a little bit of time to focus on something that I want to focus on. But of course it depends on the day, right? Some days you go to bed and you just there's stuff going around your head, and you can't really avoid it. So it's not a static thing, you know. It's not like you always do it very well or you always do it very badly. It's something you have to remind yourself about and practice over time.
When you're saying that it's not static, right? Where you're saying that, hey, so it's ever evolving. And at some point you might get really good at it and part of your life, and then you go back on your old habits, right? And that's just the way we work. The other topic I wanted to mention is that, you know, time by now is far more valuable than money. And there's a lot of talk about people sharing their calendars, right? How they time box everything and books, and how they put all of their things in every day. Like, are you one of those people that try to squeeze in like 1,030-minute slots in a day and try to do everything every day? Or are you more chilled about it and like take those long chunks of time to focus on things?
Yeah, it depends, right? So for example, we're doing a lot of investor calls at the moment, and pretty much every day is just full of investor calls. You know, there's not that many ways to avoid that unless you really want to elongate the process. But let's say on a standard week or month, I like to put focus blocks into my calendar. And I like to try and design it around where I feel I can be the most productive. So for example, I'm more of a morning person than I am a afternoon and evening person. So I love to have mornings free to do project work. It's a bit of a waste of my time if I'm doing lots of phone calls in the morning, because I could be using that kind of thinking time better on just one or two projects. Whereas after lunch, I start to become pretty useless, and you're probably going to get the most out of me, you know, kind of contributing to something rather than really driving a project forward. So I try and design my calendar a little bit around that. But as I think most of us who put focus time into our calendars know, it's not that easy to protect that time, and you have to be pretty strict.
People grab it anyway, right? You can put it in bold letters with emojis, whatever it is. It doesn't matter. Yeah.
One little trick though, which doesn't work so well now in Oliva because we're a very small team and you literally just lean over to talk to someone. But when I was working in bigger organizations, a great little tip is don't put focus time in those blocks. Make up a name, even if it's just a few initials or something like that, because when people see focus time, they book over it. But if you put some random event name, they're like, okay, this is a real meeting. I'm
call Ignacio, whatever, and then you're just like have your own time. I agree, man. I actually did that today, so it's funny that you mention it.
Nice.
So there isn't enough time to do it all, right? Like that's just a fact of life. And even if you just triple your team, quadruple your team, you're always shorthanded. You're always out of time. Like I'm sure you've experienced this. So prioritizing is absolutely key. What are your struggles and learnings in this area in prioritizing where to focus on and on what your teams should focus as well?
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky. I think there's a reason there are many, many books and articles about prioritization and frameworks and matrix. Exactly. You know, there's a reason for this because it's a big topic that no one's really nailed up until now. Of course, there are different frameworks, and I think, you know, some good project management frameworks to do that. I like to work with the kind of Kanban way of working. It really helps me because I'm a visual person. I love to see, right, what's everything in my backlog? What am I committing to this week? And what have I actually achieved? So it's a really simple method that works for me. A book that I read some time ago that really helped me was The One Thing. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if you've read that, but it's basic premise of, you know, yes, you've got many, many things to do, but what is the one thing you could focus on now that's actually going to help you unlock the next things that you do? So don't think about the next things, but think about what's that one thing that you can do now. And that was quite useful. And actually, in previous teams, I've experimented with in our kind of daily updates, just asking the team not to say everything they're going to do, but just to say, right, this is the one thing for today or the one thing for this week. Because
that's good. I love that.
It works well. It works well. And the other thing for the recipient of the information as well, because I mean, you know what it's like. If you ask somebody, hey, what are you up to today? And they just read you their whole to-do list, you're not really taking that in. You're basically just getting proof they're working, which is not the way to operate in a productive team, in my opinion. So, but when somebody says one thing, you can remember that and you can challenge it or you can give feedback on it. You know, you can do something meaningful. So yeah, that's been quite helpful.
No, I think that's really good in general. I mean, one of the things about this these frameworks or things that you read, right, is that they sound amazing when you're reading it, and then in the everyday life you just fall off it, right? And so that little trick where you get your team used to it as well, it's really good because you just help each other stay on track of that, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I really like that idea. Usually, when you ask somebody if they're motivated, when they're motivated people, right, they'll say like, sure, I'm really busy, but I know that we still need to get this done, and it's fine, I can put in the extra hours. Somebody in your team, right? It's not easy in those scenarios to proactively, as a manager, say to someone, okay, you think you can handle it, but you know what? I've actually been looking at some signals here. Why don't you take things a bit slower and you actually recover from this? Have you managed to like proactively find these little signals in your team to say, guys, okay, I know you can do more, but let's scale it back a bit?
Yeah. So to take a step back a little bit, I've got a kind of don't know what the word is, like an approach that the way I think about people going above and beyond, right? So I don't think it's realistic to say to people, come in, do your 9 to 5 and then leave and then, shut the door and then everything's done. Because the reality is that's not why they're there. They're not working in startups just to do a 9 to 5, right? Yeah. They want flexibility, and with flexibility happens on all sides, right? So I don't think forcing that kind of old-fashioned way of working just to kind of solve the problem of people overworking is necessarily the right thing to do. So I try not to say to people, look, come in at 9, don't start thinking until 9 o'clock, and then at 6 o'clock, shut your laptop. Doesn't matter what you're doing at that point, just shut your laptop, stop thinking about work, and then go and get on with your life. I just don't think that's realistic, because the types of profiles you hire into startups where you need people to really be contributing in a significant way to like building new ground, those aren't the types of profiles in my experience that want to just be able to shut the laptop at 6 o'clock, just whatever they're doing. But it is important everyone has boundaries. It is important that you don't get into bad habits. So a habit being, when you do it on a regular basis rather than just on a one-off. So if every day you're going above and beyond, something probably isn't right. The way I like to think about it is, and the way I tell people in my team is, because often the reason why it's hard for us to do something is because, or to change our behavior, is because we feel like we're doing somebody else a disservice, and that's eventually going to do us a disservice because we're putting somebody else out, right? Mm-hmm. But actually, you can shift the dynamic a little bit. So one thing I say to my team is, if you're constantly doing 150%, if you're constantly at 150%, what I think is 100% for you is actually your 150%. So when you do 100%, I think you're doing 50% or 75%. Yeah, do you know what I mean? So you're creating this false expectation, exactly. Yeah. And the practical side of that is, I have no idea how to do my hiring plan or my resource plan because I've got a team of people working at 150%. I think I only need 10 people, whereas actually I need 15 people or whatever it might be. So you're actually not doing me a favor by doing this, because you're making me blind to what I actually need in terms of resources. And I found that when talking to people in this kind of quite pragmatic way and putting the onus back on, well, actually, you're not doing me any favors at all by being at 150% all of the time. Yeah, that actually helps people justify to themselves, okay, I need to make sure I know where my 100% is, and not to constantly go over that. Sometimes yes, but not constantly, because it creates this false set of expectations. And I find that pragmatic way of talking about it with people helps people to connect.
No, yeah, absolutely. I think it's also for people when they're starting a new job or whatever, or just joining the team. You want to impress everybody, right? But you need to be to make sure that you're working at a rhythm that you can maintain, right? So it's a super interesting
Absolutely.
point. The other pain besides burnouts I wanted to touch upon today was dealing with information overload, and you already talked a little bit about it when we were starting the podcast in the True or False. So blogs, newsletters, Slack communities, courses, books, media, you name it, right? Like keeping up with everything going on, it's really hard. And there is a lot of FOMO going around. So has this been an important source of stress in your career as a marketer?
Yeah. Yeah, quite simply. Yeah, look, when you get started out, everybody's talking about the 100 books that they've read, in the space, and some people creating blogs about, here's my summary of the, my top 1,000 books or something like that. And you're like, so imagine that you're starting out and already you feel like you're 1,000 books behind. And not only that, every day new books are being published.
Yeah.
So you're 1,000 books behind, and new books are being added to the pile.
And that's like 5 years in like reading time, right? So you're actually,
yeah. So it's crazy, and then you start looking for these hacks, like how can I? And this is how things like Blinkist and
audiobooks and so on.
Audio, exactly. All of this stuff has been created, which are great. But then you start to hear these different opinions, like, well, actually, I think those summary type apps you're not really getting the information you need to get from the book. You actually need to read the whole book end to end. And then you hear this advice saying, well, actually, you need to get into skimming. Like the best readers are the ones who can skim and get through.
I hate that. Yeah.
It's like,
yeah.
What do I do here? What do I do? So you end up kind of spending most of your time benchmarking yourself against others, rather than actually seeking out the knowledge that you need to feel like you're doing a good job. You just constantly feel like you're doing a bad job because there's always something else to know, and there's always something you haven't read.
Yeah.
And then let's add on top of this, and I think this is where it especially happens in marketing. I mean, I'm sure other spaces, but I think in marketing in particular, there is so much content being created every single day. Articles, podcasts, all of this. And everyone talks about it. And marketers love to talk about it. I heard this great podcast. I read this great book. I read this great article. And you feel this, or at least I did. I felt this pressure to have read and listened to all of that same content as well. Otherwise, it's like I've skipped lectures at university. That's the kind of feeling,
Yeah.
So I think
100%.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah, no. And I think one of the things that increases this stress is that we tend to think that we're the only idiots that are not nailing it, right? Because and it's only you who's struggling because you're either unorganized or lazy, and everybody else plans their time way better than you. Because it seems like and to be fair, like many people sharing others' contents out there are not just read a headline and then just schedule a tweet, right? Oh, cool headline, schedule a tweet, done. But that gives you the sensation of like, hey, how does this guy keep up his job like as an executive in a massive company, and at the same time publishes, and you have interns and many people around that. So do you feel like everybody, or did you feel, maybe not right now, right, but earlier in your career, that you were the only one not keeping up and everybody was?
Yeah, I guess I did. I think it is a little bit lonely like that. You feel like, I think especially as a manager or a department lead, or at least in my experience, I kind of, I often had this feeling of my team are these amazing young individuals who are just constantly consuming content. And that's fantastic from a leadership point of view, right? Because you want your team to be doing that. But it also has its downside, which is it makes you feel like you're getting behind. And if you haven't read all of the same content as your team, then you're a kind of lesser, you've got less knowledge than them, and how are you going to lead them? So it creates these interesting psychological dynamics. But I think what I've realized is, we've been living through the information age, right? If we think pre-internet, information was not anywhere near as widely available as it is now. Internet was amazing because it's basically said, look, everybody gets access to everything. Incredible. What an incredible shift for society to go through. But what's happening now off the back of that is we're now saying, well, whoa, hang on. It's too much information for me to soak in. So what we're now going to have to live through is the curation age. And I think we're starting to see that. We're starting to see that in hospitality. If you think of boutique hotels and, rather than just going to the normal high street restaurants, there are lots of little kind of unique brands. I think we're very much starting to live through the curation age. And I think that will happen and is happening in content as well. And I think psychologically, we need to remind ourselves that that the power is not in just dredging the bottom of the ocean for everything, but it's understanding where to get your curated content and be confident that you're tapping into the best sources. So that might be listen to your favorite podcast once a week or once a month or whatever it is.
Which is this one, obviously. which
obviously
is
this one, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't need to listen to anything else, whatever it might be. You have to. I think curation is the key.
No, I absolutely agree. That was related to my next questions, right? I think I realized that I do get stressed by this, like quite a chunk, but not really by things of like being the first to find out that Slack got acquired, right? Like I don't need to follow that quick feed of like things that before anybody else, but I do feel it when it comes to like more in-depth articles, right? So there's a really great article, everybody's talking about it, and you're like, I'll read this one as soon as I have time, and that time never comes. And then you just get stressed about it. So I agree with you. One of the ways I found is to just limit my exposure, right? So try to like keep an eye only on like 5 sources of information that I know are always valuable, and just unfollow everything else. Because if I just keep seeing it, I'm just not putting myself in a good position, right? I'm going to be like, oh, God. What about this internally, though? Because as manager, you want to encourage your team to like learn this kind of stuff. But it's so easy that as they go through the day, you're like, you have this Slack channel where you say, great books, great reads, here's a PDF report or whatnot. But most that people are getting from that is like, holy shit, more stuff to do while I was already packed. I don't think I'm going to keep up with this. How would you find a balance there between like really sending great stuff that you hope your entire team enjoys and reads and learns, and not collapsing everybody with FOMO, right? It's really difficult.
Yeah. I mean, it's a difficult balance to strike. My opinion is, first of all, when you're talking about your team, the chance is you've hired smart people who are adults who can take care of seeking out the knowledge they need to seek out. They read the things they're interested in, they ignore the things they're not, etc. And yes, they might need some guidance. In terms of in the work environment, what I would encourage is to go deep on topics as and when you need to. So instead of thinking about all of the things you don't know and trying to fill all of those gaps all of the time, and thus leading to this sense of stress and FOMO, etc., instead think of, okay, so what are we focusing on? For example, maybe we've got an OKR this quarter, which is to, get our sales system set up and, our CRM and blah, 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 right? Okay, now let's go deep on that topic. Let's share articles about that topic. Let's read as much as possible. Let's listen to podcast interviews. Let's share those insights. Let's go really, really deep on that topic. And that way, you're actually solving a problem that you have right now, and you're actually going to soak in that information a lot more because you're applying it to your real life situation. Whereas if you're reading about the next thing in AI and marketing and how it's going to okay, interesting or whatever, but if you can't apply that to a problem, it's unlikely you're going to take it in the same way. It's the same with language learning. For example, so when I was, I used to live in Manchester in the UK.
Yeah, you had a background teaching, right? English.
Yeah, well, so the teaching English thing came a little bit later, but I took an interest in Spanish years ago when I lived in Manchester in the north of UK. So a friend and I, we went to Spanish classes like once a week, just one hour class. And it was a nice little ritual. We went to Spanish class and we went for a few beers and had some Spanish beers afterwards. Nice thing to do. But I could not soak it in at all. I just could not. Like, I didn't get it. I just didn't get it. And I was always very bad at languages at school, like, because they used to always teach through grammar, but they would never teach us grammar in English. So they would talk about past participles and subjunctive, and we'd be like, well, we don't know what this stuff is in English. So it was like a bad teaching method. But yeah, so I went to these Spanish lessons. I couldn't soak anything in. I couldn't speak any Spanish, couldn't say anything. But when I moved to Spain, and I suddenly had this need and this daily embarrassment, like literally embarrassing myself on a daily basis, not being able to say things or ask for things. Suddenly you have this need, and that drive to learn is much greater. And also your concentration, your ability to soak in that information is much greater and then you get to go and practice it. So I think it should be the same in terms of marketing, right? So forget all of the noise. What is the thing that you're trying to do now? Or maybe you want to prepare yourself for in a year's time or whatever it might be, and really focus on that now and go deep in the topic and almost ignore everything else.
One of the ways I've found to put that into practice, and this is a tip maybe for the audience as well, because one of the reasons you share it is because you're like, I don't want to forget to share this, right? Like that's one of the reasons you just said, oh, cool article, I'm just going to share it. Like even before you read it, right? Because everybody thinks it's great. One of the ways I've found to do that is that I have like this RSS feed app, right? So I just check it from the blogs that I actually care about, like every morning or whatnot, and I tag them. So I put a tag on it, CRO, SEM, whatever it is, And then when I'm actually focused on that topic, I'm like, okay, what have I been saving in the last 4 months about this topic, right? Because I don't read shit of it because I don't have the time to do it, right? But headline a little bit, okay, got it, starred, tagged, right? And I think that helps.
Yep. Yeah, I like that.
But it's good. It's a good tip that you give because it's when you don't focus and you try to learn a little bit of CRO today, a little bit of AI tomorrow, it's when you just don't achieve anything. You need to like really focus for long stretches of time in topics to be able to make a dent. Exactly. The other one I wanted to get into, it's that a lot of people get in this obsession of consuming content and delaying execution, right? So when you are like, hey, so we need to do X, Y, or Z, we need to do a new landing page or whatever, and you'll find people following every single blog there is, reading every article, every course in every outlet out there, and never get to the actual doing, right? And honestly, one of the reasons you should focus on doing is because sure, books are great and articles are great, but that's the way to really learn, like executing. Yeah. Have you found yourself or people on your team like falling in this trap where you're just like, I'm not going to do this until I know everything there is to know about it, and then you just never do it?
Yeah. So I think it's pretty common, right? The nice way to say it is it's being a perfectionist. But really there's no excuse. Yeah. It's just bad practice. It's especially in marketing. I think the longer you've been in marketing, the more you realize that true value comes from just doing stuff, experimenting and learning from those experiments rather than trying to come up with the perfect strategy theoretically, because everything's different. We're in different industries. We've got different customers. There's different market dynamics. So you can never get 100% of what you're looking for from theory in a book. So really the best way is to put it out there. Of course, you should come in with the basics. You should know what a landing page is. You should know how to set goals. You should know all of that kind of stuff. But ultimately, the learning is going to come from doing. Exactly.
Yeah, and to add to the stress of consuming all that content, right? We also talked in previous episodes, and we don't need to go deep, but just to close this topic off, about the pressure you feel for putting out your own content as well, right? I told you about in our earlier call that for me, this podcast feels a little bit like therapy, right? Because it's like a conversation with friends, but in a way, it's also freaking stressful to coordinate with every guest and so on. Like, I think looking at your social and whatnot, I think that maybe you've already resign to that and be like, I'm okay with like not becoming another influencer. But has this been a big source of stress for you maybe earlier in your career or until recently?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a big source of stress. So I think social media is an interesting one. Both personally and professionally, it's something that I've let pass by me relatively easily. So definitely earlier on, before I had any experience really, I was focused more on the vanity metrics. So my Twitter, for example, I think it has quite a few followers, but a lot of that is just rubbish stuff from the early days, quite honestly. And I haven't posted anything on Twitter for I think years. Like Twitter is literally it's something I've completely
It's too fast, dude. It's just too fast.
Yeah, and honestly, it's just not where I want to spend my time, quite frankly. LinkedIn, I'm a little bit more active these days, actually, because I've actually found that LinkedIn is a great network. Rather than just broadcasting content, it's great for getting feedback and real opinion. It's become quite an interesting platform for actual engagement. So I've actually been a little bit more active on that. Not massively active, but more active. Yeah. But yeah, in my private life, I don't use Facebook anymore. I don't have a personal. My personal Twitter is the same as my work Twitter, but I don't use it. I have all of these handles and things, but I just don't use them anymore. Yeah. Instagram, I like taking travel photography and things like that, but I don't use it to socialize. I think I'm just antisocial, to be honest.
But I think it also comes with overexposure, and then you just need to scale it back a bit, right? Like you start getting really excited about these things, and you're like, dude, this drives me nuts. I need to get away from it a bit.
Honestly, channel overload is one of the things that stresses me out the most. Just when you've got emails stacking up, you've got WhatsApp stacking up, and then if you have Messenger and things like this, and I just don't want all of these channels and sources of communication. I like to keep it quite simple.
Yeah. All right, dude. Moving on to your third pain, which is a more work-related, getting to Oliva kind of pain. Prioritizing quality over quantity in the early days, right? You mentioned this about not tripping not tripping over yourselves when you're seeing some traction. So when you're seeing early traction in your business, which is the case for you guys, it's easy to get carried away and to try to serve everybody at the expense of the quality of your service, right? An interesting case I've seen here in the Netherlands is an online supermarket called Picnic, which started like very low key in like outskirts of the city or other cities before moving to Amsterdam, and they had a massive waiting list. And I was there thinking like, oh man, can't you feel like, oh man, if we don't serve these people, they're just gonna go somewhere else, right? But no, people actually stick in that wait list, me included, like for a year or whatever it took to get there, right? And you earned your spot. And they were so careful about trying to keep the service level to a high standard that they just refused money, literally.
Yeah.
How are you resisting that temptation in the early days of Oliva?
Yeah, so just to give some context to your listeners as well. So Oliva's been kind of live, open to the world for just over a month now. Yeah. So we're still very, very early on. And we haven't done many marketing pushes or anything like that. And we've been lucky to get a little bit of early traction, some real customers coming through, taking therapy and all of that kind of stuff, which has been great because we can get the feedback, we can do rapid iteration, et cetera, and it's all very kind of close-knit and, controllable. We're not having to, run around like headless chickens.
Yeah.
Well, there's a little bit of that. And yeah, now we're starting to talk to a few investors as well. And, investors ask us things like, well, hey, like to be fully scalable, why don't you do things like asynchronous chat? Because that, your margin's going to be higher. It's easier to serve many customers with just one practitioner. And then there's, things like this. But we just don't believe that's the way to do it. We believe you shouldn't start with scale. You should start from the foundations up. We went into this not thinking, right, how do we create like $1 billion company? We went into this thinking, how do we actually start to make a dent in the problem with the mental health industry, which is that it's old-fashioned, fragmented, prices are opaque, it's clinical, all of that kind of stuff. So you don't solve those problems by just having a super successful, financially viable business just because you can squeeze the margins out of the business. We think that you actually make a dent in that problem by focusing on high quality, meaningful mental health care, which is why we say that meaningful. We believe in evidence-based mental health care. And the reality is, it doesn't look as good on the business model. This
that's what I was going to say. Yeah.
Quite frankly, it doesn't look quite as good. Yeah, sorry.
No. But keep going with that one. I love that idea because one of the things that's interesting is that, well, I think it's coming back a bit, right? So in the last 10 years or 5 years or whatnot of like Silicon Valley billion and bazillions and so on, it was all about rapid growth, hack that growth, and rapid. That was all investors care about. But I think over several really failed projects like this, right? Projects that were valuated in 20 billion and never made a penny. I could go sell cookies outside and make more of a profit tomorrow than those businesses, right? Investors have kind of be like, oh, nice. Like profit is not a swear word anymore. Like maybe that sounds actually kind of interesting. Yeah. But there are the lesser, right? So yeah, how do you make sure that find that business plan balance there?
No, I think you're right. I think the trend is changing a little bit, not for everybody, but for example, we're only speaking to investors who believe in long-term visions, not just short-term rapid growth, and believe in actually making a dent in a problem. So you can find those people, and we're lucky to be able to speak to some of them. But yeah, the reality is for the other camp of investors, what we're starting out with maybe doesn't look as good, because when you hire highly qualified therapists, for example, and you try and create a price point that's accessible for people, your margins aren't going to look that great at the beginning, because highly qualified therapists deserve to be well paid because they've gone through maybe 4 to 6 years of studying to be able to give that care.
Correct.
The solution elsewhere in the market that we're seeing is hire people with less than a year's experience, which they deserve to build up their experience. But what we see is a lack of transparency about what you're getting for your money, or things like asynchronous therapy chat, which is non-evidence based. There's no pure science, or at least kind of statistically significant studies that prove that this is an effective form of therapy, but it's being sold as just normal therapy.
Hold on, just to get this right. By that you mean that there's a single therapist, like maybe chatting with 4 people at the same time, or how does that?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Exactly. So a therapist will essentially have a quota to respond to a certain number of chats from their clients within a certain amount of time, usually 24 hours. Right. But it means you have quite a fragmented experience. If you're feeling utterly exhausted after coming out of a meeting with your manager, and you don't really understand this feeling you're having, then you go onto a chat, kind of like a WhatsApp kind of experience. There's something that doesn't feel quite right to us about that.
As somebody that's been in therapy before, I would, if I can give you any feedback, that doesn't sound fantastic to the experience I'm used to, right? Like from actually going deep with somebody.
Agreed. But then you have talking therapy, which is highly backed by science, right? So just 2 people talking, and one of those people is a certified, experienced expert, and they know how to guide that conversation, ask the right questions, press the right buttons, all of that kind of stuff to help you move towards your goals. That has been proven time and time again to work. From a business perspective, you've got somebody who's highly qualified and demands a good price, a good salary to give that session, and you've got one person paying for that session. So that's quite hard to make those margins look really, really good. Then you add all of the tech and everything, all the marketing and stuff on top. Yeah. But we truly believe starting there and building from the foundations upwards is the best way to go. There are plenty of other ways that you can make the business healthier from a balance sheet point of view. Yeah. But you first have to get the care right. You have to get that right, because if you don't get that right, it's all just smoke and mirrors. It's all just crap, basically.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that is that the more is not always the merrier, right? Like, and this is particularly true for like 2-sided marketplaces, which is kind of like what you guys are in a way, right? Where there are several scenarios in which having more traction than you can handle is not that great. It creates more of an issue than a benefit. Have you guys kind of like defined what that sweet spot looks for you? Like, what are the signs of like, hey, we're at the healthy here with X, Y, or Z numbers, and if we go south or north, we might be going in the wrong direction, or is that still ongoing?
So the first thing to say is we don't actually define ourselves as a marketplace, and there's a couple of key reasons for that. One is one of the key problems we're trying to solve is that when you look for support from a therapist, one of the most common routes to do that right now is to go to Google and type in something like therapist near me, online therapy, how to find a therapist, or something along those lines. What you get given is hundreds of individual websites built by therapists. And the reason is because therapists, they study for 4 to 6 years, depending on the country they study in. 99% of them go on to be freelance after that. So they're suddenly thrown into this world of business, and they've not done 1 minute of studying how to open a business. So they don't know how to do marketing, how to set up their tech stack, how to build a website, how to do communication. And quite frankly, what they tell us is they don't like all of that stuff as well. Yeah. So what that creates is this huge list of little WordPress websites, where they're super old-fashioned, there's clinical jargon, it's hard to navigate because it's not built by people who have set out to communicate this stuff in the best way. Yeah. So a marketplace doesn't really solve that problem because it's just like a fancy version of Google.
Agree.
You still have to look through a big list of therapists and look at their photos and look at all of these clinical terms.
Better design, but the same thing at the end of the day.
Exactly. A little bit nicer, everything in one place, but you still have to do the same thing. So the problem isn't solved. At Oliva, you can't actually choose a therapist. You can't go onto a list of therapists and choose your therapist. Everything starts with a matching session with our clinical lead, our most senior therapist. And she spends time getting to know you, your goals, and she will make the match to one of the therapists because she has that expertise to do that. And that initial match is one of the most important touch points of your therapy journey. And around 70% of people get it wrong, which is very expensive and very emotionally draining. Yeah. So that's a big difference between us and a marketplace. You can't actually just go and choose your therapist on Oliva. But to answer your question, that sweet spot, so yes and no. I mean, we've ran the numbers. We know more or less kind of where we're going. But again, we're very much focusing on, get it right for 10 customers, get it right for 100 customers, get it right for 1,000 customers. Literally just focus on each group as we scale up.
Yeah, baby steps. Coming into the last pain, which is the early stage fundraising. You talked a little bit how your days are very based on this in the last few weeks. Fundraising is a tricky process because it just doesn't mean. I don't mean to picture investors as evil. We've had before Rand Fishkin on the show who had some like horror stories about his experience, right? But I think it really depends because they're just not. That's not the case. They're just trying to get their returns and like look for their interests, which is fair. But in that process, those can really clash with the founder's interests, right? Like that's really tricky. I know you and your co-founder are both experiencing this topic, right? But what are the main pains you're going through with making sure you don't sacrifice your own dream in this process, right?
Yeah, good question. I mean, look, the two main pains that I experience are one, just pure exhaustion from having back-to-back calls. So I'm an introvert at heart, and I need time by myself just to reflect, just to recharge. Like I recharge my batteries by being by myself, by having a bit of quiet time. That's how I recharge. So when you have literally back-to-back calls and you're squeezing in lunch and then you have a team meeting or whatever, then you go for a drink or something with somebody, it's
not your jam.
Exhausting.
Yeah.
Not my jam, exactly. So I like to create space and time to be able to think and recharge. So that's probably the main thing, the biggest pain. But the other side of it is, and I think a lot of people who have gone through a similar experience of fundraising will connect with, is you kind of feel like you're under the microscope constantly, right? That is emotionally draining as well. And if you have many conversations, you deal with many personalities. Some people are very pragmatic and numbers driven. Some people are very kind of vision driven and story driven. So you're constantly trying to work out like which version of me, which version of my story am I best placed to talk about right now. So that can be very, very tiring. What I will say though, in investors' defense, right, is we've had some amazing conversations with amazing people. Like there are so many really good, genuine people out there. These, like you said, they're not evil people.
No, this is also not venture capitalist, right? Like you're just looking at angels at this point, or also venture capitalist.
No, we are speaking to VCs as well.
Okay.
But I mean, most of our jobs, not all, but most of our jobs, we're in something for profit. Whether that's personal profit to make the business profitable, and investors are no different, right? What's the challenge is to find somebody who aligns with your values, your vision, etc. And that's not their fault. It's just you've got a smaller funnel of people to deal with, so it's quite hard to find those
Correct.
people. Which is why like referrals and things like this is really, really a great way to go. We've been very lucky because we're quite lucky with our network, and we've had some great referrals and inbound interest. And I think if you're just starting out, like first time, it's going to be harder to get to those people, quite honestly.
Yeah.
But they're there, and actually you start to talk to people who just get it. They completely get it. You don't have to, be bullshitting them. You don't, you can just say how it is. It just depends on your situation and how like desperate you are to get that deal done. And again, about boundaries, you have to create boundaries. And if you find yourself crossing a boundary in terms of you're sacrificing your values and you're changing your vision just to try and get that deal done, yes, you'll get some money in the bank now, but it's probably not going to look very good later on.
Yeah, and it's also tricky because like everything, like hiring or whatnot, like you can be in the same page when you start and you start falling off the same page as you go when the money's already in it, right? So that's also a tricky thing. Before we were discussing prioritizing quality over quantity, and when it comes to fundraising, there's one of the mistakes that many companies make. It's getting overfunded, right? It's like taking too much, which comes with trade-offs because by now we know there's no such thing as free money. So have you guys defined where that sweet spot is in like the amount you want to raise and so on to make sure that you're not selling your soul farther than you want?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, look, I'm still learning here, right? I'm not an experienced fundraiser at all. In fact, this is the first time I've had to, go this in depth with investors about fundraising.
Your co-founder is a little bit more maybe.
He's more experienced for sure. Yeah, exactly. He's been through more of this journey, so he's been great to learn from during this experience. So I'm definitely still learning. But what I would say is there are a couple of key kind of things that you need to look out for. So one is, how much money do you need? So, what are your plans? Who do you need to hire to be able to get to where you want to go to, et cetera, et cetera? How much runway do you want? How comfortable do you want to be? How aggressive do you want to be? Whatever, right? And that's your own decision. And that leads to how much money do you need? And the other one is, how much dilution of equity are you willing to accept? And with those two things, you have everything you need, really. You as long as you get this much money minimum and the dilution hasn't gone over this amount, then okay, you've set your boundaries and you're good. And if you have the opportunity to get more money at the same dilution or less, okay, make yourself more comfortable. Why not? But if you're asking for more money for more dilution than you're willing to accept, then you're crossing a boundary that you've set.
Yeah, and also understanding how their interest works, right? Like how much, because let's say somebody actually gives you more money and you don't dilute that much more. And you're like, oh, that's fantastic. But when putting in more money, there are steeper expectations of what you guys need to achieve, right? So the pressure where you go like, oh, we're growing great, and the investor will be, not really, because I'm expecting a 9x return here by next year. That's also a very tricky thing, like understanding really what they expect from the business and make sure you're on the same page with that as well, right?
100%. Yeah, I think it's easy to have dollar signs in your eyes and, you see all of this potential money coming in, but you've got to project yourself 6 months or a year down the road and imagine things aren't going so well. Do you feel okay at that point? Like, are you okay to go back to those investors and say, well, look, we're still working on this, we're not quite there yet, or actually you're going to be putting yourself under a lot of emotional strain? So I think it's important. There's no formula for this as far as I know, right?
No,
but
absolutely.
You have to kind of look out for that. It's not all about the money, that's for sure.
Well, about that, not all being about the money, like the relationship with investors, hopefully it's not all about the money, right? It's also because they bring expertise and they bring advice and they bring that kind of stuff. Are you guys also looking for that? Or in a way you're like, thank you for the money, now leave me alone. Now let me do my thing. What is your take on that one?
Look, we want to execute. We want to build. We think we have a good idea of what we need to do next. We're not completely blind in terms of what we need to do next. But it's always good to have smart people on the end of the phone to help out with things, right? So yes, we want people with the right connections, with the right knowledge that can help us. But we don't want to be thrown into multiple different directions with multiple opinions. We want to stay focused and build what we believe in. So we don't just want to take the money and say goodbye, but at the same time, this is our business. This is something we're building. We are very willing for people to be a part of it, but on our terms and with their advice. That's the way we think about it.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that's tricky about this process, and that people put a lot of focus in it, is your investing deck, right? Or investor pitch deck or whatever. To be honest, like we spend our lives doing landing pages, writing copy, doing all these kinds of stuff. But that thing is hard, right? Because everybody shares with you, no. It cannot be more than 10 slides. By no means. And you're like, but I have something really cool to add. Yeah, but 11, never. Right? And they share with you the whatever Airbnb deck and tell you this is the exact structure that you have to do your own. Have you had to deal with that pain, or has it been more conversational in your process?
Yeah, I mean, on a micro level, look, I mean, for example, the first version of our deck, it was more like a keynote, right? Like one idea per slide, lots of breathing space for the ideas, lots of nice design, stuff like that. And we were very proud of it. Okay, this is cool. This is the kind of thing we would like to read through. And we got some immediate feedback, which was, beautiful slides, but look, just condense that down a bit. I just want to go do. I'm okay reading more than one idea on one slide. And it was good advice. Investors, it's not a keynote presentation. People want information. They just want a very simple way to get through that information. So we got that feedback pretty early on. We adapted and it was fine. It worked out pretty well from there. And we made a few iterations to the deck, but it's not been a massive pain.
It's tricky because you feel sometimes that even the focus like even goes away from the business you're presenting, and it starts like people are like judging you by how you put this together, right? Like, do you have the right structure and so on? Yeah. Okay, man. We're starting to wrap this up. It's been a really cool conversation. I wanted to spend the last few minutes sharing some resources. So we usually recommend some stuff that we listen to, see, whatever it is. Do you have some stuff to share?
Yeah, so I think you mentioned him at the beginning, actually. So a friend of mine, an ex-colleague, has a podcast called ChurnFM.
Mm-hmm.
If you're in SaaS especially, I really recommend this. So it's genuinely one of those podcasts where you come out with actionable insights. You can actually go and implement some of this stuff. He's a great interviewer as well, like very humble, and just, he's able to get good information out of people. So yeah, I really recommend ChurnFM. There's a book I read it some time ago, but I actually I've been talking about it to quite a few people recently, both within Oliva, because we see ourselves as very much designing experience. We're not just giving therapy; we're designing experiences around therapy. But it's a book called The Power of Moments, and I can't recommend it enough. It talks about the power of moments, the power of small moments. And for example, there's an analogy of going to Disneyland, and from the beginning to the end, there's many moments you go through, right? From buying an ice cream to standing in line for 3 hours, to being on the roller coaster, to having an argument with your kids, whatever it might be, and then eventually leaving. But if you can put just one or two big high moments in there, a lot of the low moments actually disappear when you look back and rate that experience.
That's
so it's
cool.
really interesting for brands to think in that way as well. Like, how can we strategically increase the power of the positive moments that people have with our brands? It's a great read.
Okay.
So, yeah, I'd recommend that.
All right. I'm going to wrap it up by recommending, actually, I usually recommend business stuff, but I'm going to go outside of that today and recommend a novel. I don't read many of them, but I'm really happy reading the one I'm reading right now. It's called Anxious People by a Swedish author called Frederick Backman. It's super interesting. It just sounds like a really cool, funny way to portray how freaking stressful our world is and how people end up doing all sorts of crazy stuff, like robbing a bank in this case, just by the situations we get put on, right? Like a little bit like the message that you get from Breaking Bad, but in a more comedic, really intertwined way. It's super fun. So for everybody, dealing with this crazy world that we're doing this year in particular, I think it puts a lot of things in perspective. All right, dude.
Nice.
Really happy to have you today. Thank you for the conversation. It's been really fun. Hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Thanks, Nacho. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys. See you on the next episode. Bye-bye.
Growth Pains.